Well, it is good to be out tonight. It is good to see everyone out. I'm doing something tonight that I don't usually do. That is reuse an old lesson. Usually I like to come up with one anytime I know I'm going to speak. I like to come up with one anyways that's a bit more something along the lines of something I've been thinking about recently. And I was going back through some of the old ones that I'd done and looked and saw this one. I was like, I have a little bit of new insight for that. See, this lesson's from like 2014. And, at the time that I believe I'd preached it, my auditor was about 9 months old. And I have a little bit more insight now about people listening. More specifically, maybe kids listening. And so I thought I would come back to that with at least an added point. I appreciate the prayers on my behalf. I always appreciate that. I do need the wisdom and the knowledge and boldness, and also sometimes I need the patience not to strangle my kids, right? Because sometimes, I promise you, everything that I say goes in one ear and out the other, right? And I was this close to putting up there, it says, is this someone, you or someone you know? This close to putting up there, call, Luke and John, lawyers at law, you may be entitled to compensation for, no. This is probably one of the more frustrating types of people not listening. We've been talking a lot in the adult class about the divided kingdom here, and we're getting started into the prophets, and basically the biggest portion of God's complaint with the people is, you're not listening. For some of them, I've always associated not listening with stubbornness. I just don't want to listen. I don't want to bother with it. It's too much effort, et cetera, et cetera. But now I've actually grown a lot more familiar with the type of listening that's just in one ear and out the other. It's like there's nothing inside their head to stop or slow down those thoughts or the words or anything else. And I said, you may need to read Matthew 13. For those of us that know, Matthew 13 at the beginning here, if you look in verse 3, he spoke many things unto them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow, and when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came up and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and when they sprung up, because they had no deepness in the earth, the sun came out, and they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell amongst thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them, but others fell unto good ground and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, and some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Of course, the disciples were like, why talk to people in parables like that? Well, because those that want to listen, right? Those that want to learn, those that need to see what he's talking about, those will be the ones that get it, the ones that are actually trying to listen. Those that just come out and listen to him to see, what the speech is all about, and they don't really believe and don't believe anything else. Those are the guys, they're just not going to understand any of it, and they're going to go away. And he explained the parable of the sower to them, and he said, he that sows the seed is the Son of Man. And the field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares, I went back too far, the seed that falls on the wayside. This is the one I'm talking about here. When we were talking about in and out, the seed that falls on the wayside and the bird gets it, right? And so, Alan this morning talked about listening, and he was more talking about listening, to preaching. Me tonight, I'm not really talking about listening to preaching, although I would like you to listen to me while I'm preaching tonight. I'm more talking about when we're talking to each other and we're trying to teach each other and we're trying to instill good values on each other and help each other. That kind of listening. The warning, hey, make sure you stay away from that. That's kind of dangerous. And the ones that, these warnings and these truths and these helps go in one ear and out the other. They're not really listening. They're giving you the illusion of it. They half pay attention. They say, yeah, but it's forgotten soon after. They're those people that their rewards and the good things that would happen to them in life, if they're not careful, the bird's going to get it. They're not. what works for the Word works for us in that sense. And if we're not listening, and we're not as, you can't really see it as well on the overhead here, a big part of listening is preparing the ground beforehand so the seed may take root, right? My wife gets mad at me if she's talking to me and I'm watching TV. I only have enough brain to pay attention to one thing at a time, y'all. I'm sorry, that's the truth. It is, that's it. And if the TV's on and I'm already invested in the TV, I will miss half of what she says. And I point out to her, I say, look, if you want to make sure you've got my full attention, stop me. Make sure you've got my full attention. Get me to pause whatever I'm watching, turn it off, whatever, etc., and then talk. It's also part of the reason I have a little bit more trouble carrying on conversations while I'm driving down the road, so I try and pay enough attention to driving that I tend to miss things that she says. And so, first things first. You've got to prepare the ground. You've got to make sure, number one, that it's there. And you have to make sure that you're paying attention. Otherwise, there's no ground there for the seed to fall on. You might as well just be tossing it in the gutter and let the rain wash it away. You've got to make sure that there's not other things that you're trying to think about. If you're serious about listening to somebody, and somebody is seriously trying to help you and teach you something, you've got to make sure that you are paying attention and you understand. Because guess what else half listening gets you? Gets you a nice big misunderstanding, doesn't it? You ever had that? Where somebody, you get two people and they're having a conversation and they're talking right past each other. One person's point's this, the other person's point's this. They both think they're arguing with each other. The other person's arguing with them, disagreeing with them. No, they're making the same point. They're just using different imagery and wording to do it, and neither one of them realizes it. They're both getting mad at each other. This is where we got to slow down and make sure that it's not coming in the way I think it is, and I'm just pushing it right back out and not actually listening to what they say. We have to be careful about that. It's really easy to do. But the other type of stubbornness, not listening, is stubbornness, and it is a lot worse. All right? Not hearing is not hearing. You can stop somebody and get them to hear eventually, right? Stubbornness is hearing what they say and ignoring, which is a much, much harder thing to break. Defining stubborn: unreasonably obstinate, inflexibly fixed in an opinion, not to be moved or persuaded, right? As a stubborn son, a stubborn mind, a stubborn soul, a stubborn mule. We all know somebody that has been stubborn. We've all been that person. We've all been the person that's gone in one ear and out the other at some point. We've all been the person that's been too stubborn to listen at some point. I'm 39. From the time I was 15 probably to the time I was about 25, I learned a whole lot of things the hard way because I was too stubborn to listen to my dad. And the thing about it is, it's another one of these things. It takes work to get ourselves away from this. You find this all over the Bible. If you look up the word stubborn, it doesn't show up all that often. But if you look up stiff-necked, hard of heart, or a hardened heart, uncircumcised of the ears, uncircumcised of the heart, hardened head. These are all terms in the King James that are used to describe somebody that is just too stubborn. Stiff-necked. That one's used to describe the children of Israel a lot, and it's just the fact that they won't bow, they won't bend, they won't give somebody else the preeminence they deserve to listen to them, basically. And people have been stubborn for a long time. Noah was a preacher of righteousness, right? 2 Peter 2:5 tells us that he was a preacher of righteousness. But how many people were saved in the ark? Just him and his family. Everybody else stubbornly went about their way until it was way, way too late to help them. They heard it. They didn't heed it. Pharaoh's heart was hardened rather than the softened. Every time Moses showed him a miracle of God, Pharaoh looked at that and said, don't care. I'm not giving you what you want. You're going to give me what I want. Just wouldn't listen. Just wouldn't realize what was going to happen if he kept going the way he was going. And you think of a people that just saw all of the plagues and all of the things that were done in Egypt, you would think that those people would know better, right? What do the Hebrews do? Well, they ignored God. They were stiff-necked. They didn't listen. I mean, the very first thing, get down to Sinai, the very, very first thing that they do, make a golden calf. And all the while, they're out in the wilderness. What do? They whine, they complain. You have the God of all creation, right? The maker of all things, just absolutely destroyed any chance that Egypt had to hold on to you. Got them to let you go. You walked out, you were slaves, and you spoiled the entire country without having to lift a finger. Now you're a rich nation. He kept you alive through the desert. Your shoes didn't wear out. Your clothes didn't wear out. 40 years. But they complained the whole time, whining. Why? Too stubborn? Too stubborn to just give in and listen to God. That's the problem we're having now. Turn back over here to 2 Kings. 2 Kings 17. I picked this one up because, well, it's a good point. Here, starting at verse 9, talks about how the children of Israel did those things that were not right against the Lord their God, and they built them high places in their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree, and there they burned incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them. And they wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. For they served idols, where the Lord had said unto them, you shall not do this thing. Simple. Except, you think they'd have been warned. And were they warned? Yes. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, turn away from your evil ways. Keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law that I have commanded from your fathers, which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. But what? Verse 14, notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like the neck of their fathers, that they did not believe in the Lord their God, and they rejected his statutes. They rejected the covenant that he had made with their fathers, and his testimonies that he testified against them. They followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord charged them that they should not do like them. They left all the commandments of the Lord their God. They made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and they used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. That's a long list and a long time, hundreds of years of being dedicated to do this thing. And the way that it describes it there in verse 17, they sold themselves. We were just talking about Hosea this morning and how his wife had basically sold herself into another in prostitution where she had to be redeemed. They gave themselves completely over it to where somebody else had full control over them. That's what that was. They gave themselves so totally to it. They were so stubborn and so obstinate and so completely against just doing what God said. And you think, maybe, they learned their lesson, right? They learned their lesson, right? Right? No? No, eventually, no. Nope. Let's see. The best example here, Acts 7, I believe is where they stoned Stephen, and the particular words they use is they stopped up their ears, right? The very image that we had at the very beginning, they heard all the things he said, and instead of listening, being cut to their heart, they stopped up their ears. They said, no, I will not listen to this anymore. About John, where they call Jesus a Samaritan, and that he's got a devil because he told them the truth. And it's so funny because you get into the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and the rich man says, "Hey, send somebody back to warn my brothers." No, they've got Moses and the prophets. No, they won't listen to Moses and the prophets. But if somebody is raised from the dead, they'll listen. And Abraham says, "No. If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to listen to somebody raised from the dead." And guess what? That proves right all through Acts. What did the Jews see? They see all the miracles. What do? They don't believe the apostles. How is this possible? Even discuss amongst themselves. We can't deny that they've done a miracle. And nobody can do miracles unless God gives them the ability. That's not something Satan can do, right? But it would mean we have to do something. Why? Why don't they want change? Well, they want to push the blame on others. I don't want to be, told that I'm wrong, right? Judge not lest you be judged. How many people point that out anytime you try and say something to them? Even though they're using it completely incorrectly, right? Is basically, for whatever judgment you use will be used against you. So don't be a hypocrite, is the whole point. Don't try and go tell somebody else to do right if you're not trying to do right. That's the point of Matthew 7, but people only remember that first little bit. Ezekiel is told to be a watchman and to let people know. He's not told that he has to be perfect before he lets anybody know. He's told if he sees a problem and he doesn't blow the trumpet, he will be held accountable. Right? If I demand that anybody that ever says anything to me has to be perfect, I limit myself to only reading the Bible and listening to what it says, which, though not a bad thing as far as reading it and listening to what it says, but the fact that I would block out everybody around me would be a very big stunt to my growth as a person. So we break it down. We know that any sin is a sin against God. Right? That's what it says. That's what David says when he says, I had sinned against you and only you. And so it's between the sinner and God. And so, God might hold, say, I'm a hypocrite, but I've gone and said something to somebody, It doesn't matter to that person's sin if I'm sinful, right? We'll call this person Dave. Right? So I go to Dave and I tell Dave, you've got a problem. And he says, well, you've got this problem too. Yeah, and God sees my sin and God is going to deal with me. But guess what, Dave? God also sees your sin and the problem that you have. And it doesn't matter if I was wrong when I said something to you, or if I had things that were wrong with me. If you're still doing something wrong, God's still going to hold you accountable for it. Doesn't matter how much you don't like me. It doesn't. That's a big thing in politics. Politics is full of that these days. Everybody's just trying to throw as much mud at the other person and don't care about what they're doing wrong. This is why I hate politics. Because it's the worst of the worst behavior, just like that. And man, it's hard sometimes to just look at ourselves. Especially if you think the other person is wrong. And what they're thinking. Hey man, I noticed this, or I thought I saw this, and I thought that might be an issue, and you might want to look at that. It's like, no, you saw wrong, you heard wrong, everything that you said about that is wrong. You're just trying to push your own insecurities off on me. That's what you're doing. Is that any honest way to look at the situation? This is the thing that I've always tried to tell people, like at work or anywhere else. if I come and I tell you something, and I say, hey, I think you need to work on this, I'm not doing that to be mean to you. I'm not doing it because I don't like you. If I didn't like you, I would ignore it. Because that's a real good way to get rid of you. Let you keep making the same error over and over again, real easy to get rid of you. If I say something to you, it's because I believe that you can make the change and the improvement and be better and benefit from it, right? And it's the whole reason to say something to somebody. And so if somebody says something to me, I need to make sure I say, wait, somebody cared enough to say something? I need to look and make sure. Absolutely, absolutely sure. Turned itself off. Might give that a second. Oh, we'll be all right. Okay, that's not good. Oh, that was the vacuum. There for a second, I thought that was a tornado siren. I was like, that's not what we want to hear in the middle of a lesson. I didn't do that, I promise. All right, so now that I'm certain that I'm not going to get blown away here, even if nothing else, go back to where we were. You know, another reason I think we have so much trouble with this is because sometimes repenting and changing means you got to give something up, right? You know, that's not worth it, this is not worth it, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine being somebody like a writer, a prolific writer, right? So I did things, wrote things before I became a Christian, and then I become a Christian, and I realized that some of the stuff that I've written is absolute garbage and not worth publishing now. What do? Right? You got to distance yourself. Hey, look, it came back. You got to distance yourself from that, don't you? You can't, I wouldn't be able to, in good faith and good conscience, profit from something that was contrary to what the Bible says, right? And contrary to the way I should behave. So what can I do? Sometimes you just got to give it up, right? Maybe it's just you can't stop the royalties from coming in, but I will send those to charity. I refuse to profit, something like that. Maybe your job is not the job that you thought it was. Maybe your job leads you further away from God. Now, I've not been at a point where I've had to refuse something at a job before, but I have been at a point where in between jobs and laid off and other stuff, it's been hard. It's better. I'm going to be convinced. I've had it where I've had to borrow money from in-laws and barely been able to make ends meet and everything else to do. It's better to be that bad off, in my opinion, than it is to be better off but at a place that is going to destroy your soul. The hardest one probably is relationships, right? Been best friends with this person for a long time. Love this person to death. Been friends with them for so long, I never really noticed how bad their behavior is and their influence on me. And sometimes you have to look at that. You look at the rich young ruler. He was sad. He had many things. If he wanted to be perfect, all he had to do was sell those things, give to the poor, and follow Jesus. He couldn't do it. Pressure? Aaron can attest to what pressure and peer pressure will do, right? People come to him and said, make us gods. And what does Aaron say? Not no. That's what he should have said. You go even further with this, what the 10 spies did when they returned from the promised land and they convinced all the people that they should just go back home. That kind of pressure. Well, what about position? Look what I've done, right? Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar. Look what it did for him. He got removed from his position. He got to sleep in the field with the beasts until he realized, finally, that God was God and he gave power to whom he saw fit. Now, there was no special ability to Nebuchadnezzar that put him in the position he was in. The worst one I've seen is marriage. You know, John the Baptist pointed out to Herod that he shouldn't have married the lady he married, and guess what? Herod got divorced and thanked John the Baptist for pointing it out. Nope. Herod threw John the Baptist in jail, and then later on took his head. There were many that after the captivity had married people of the land, and Ezra went back and said, look, y'all got to give this up, and they gave it up. They gave it up. But how many people that have gotten married before they joined the church, and then they joined the church only to realize that, and to be told that their marriage was not scriptural? And so which one are they going to do? They came to Jesus. They were happy to come to Jesus. They were happy to make him part of their lives. They were happy to obey until it came to the point where suddenly they've got to give up the person they're married to. Now you go from, it was worth it to give up everything to join Jesus, to, oh, no. And they will dig and they will find everything that they can find to try and justify it and not have to listen. And every time you go and you find, give them good scriptural reason why, well, no, that's not correct, that's not correct, they will find some other straw man to throw at you. Because they just do not want to listen, because listening means that they've got a problem they've got to fix, and they do not want to do it. Lust of life can lead us astray. This one's an insidious one, really, guys. If you think about it. This one preys on our young people the most. It does. They're throwing all this stuff on TV. I want. Kids have this. You can be happy if you have this. You can be fine if you have this. Even worse, the idea is that, it kills me. Then there are multiple areas and states in this country where a kid grows up thinking that the best way that he can get out of poverty is to go become a professional sports star, and that's his only shot. Or that some people think that the only way to do it is be a movie star or a rock star or something like this. The only thing that will make them good enough in life to have all those millions and to do all those things, it's shoved in their face every day. Of course, a lot of them are going to believe it. The problem is they don't base that life, their selves and their sense of self on anything but that. And then at some point, when it goes away, when it's taken away by injury or when it goes away, what's their life founded on? We've got to get to them and let them know, base your life on God first and then worry about other things. And when everything else fails and anything else in this life will, you still have something in your life. All the Jews didn't like being pointed out about their error. And the other thing I'll add on this, the thing they really didn't like was the fact that the gospel was open to the Gentiles. They hated that thought because they were better than the Gentiles. How dare the Gentiles be given a reward that was the same as them, right? That's like 80% of the conflict between the Jews and the apostles in the New Testament. Almost all the Jews, all the times that you see that they went and they started having an issue with either Paul or when they had an issue with Stephen, it was because they mentioned something about Gentiles or because they were jealous about it. And it was ridiculous. God said by the old prophets that he would give salvation to the Gentiles. But the Jews, wanting to be better than somebody else, wanting that pride, they didn't want somebody telling them their religious belief was incorrect. So what do? Right? Well, two choices. I could be a stubborn, stiff-necked idiot. I could be Ahab. Ahab is one of those Old Testament stories. You know, it used to be one of those, well, he got what he deserved. So I feel bad for Ahab, reading the story these days. I feel bad because you see the potential. There were times that, he owned up to his sin and he was regretful of it and things like that. And he was so close to being able to be turned to the side that he was supposed to be on by Elijah. The only stinking problem was he was married to Jezebel. And he would not get rid of that. That brought about Ahab's downfall. Everything that really destroyed Ahab came from Jezebel. And all he had to do was listen, and he just listened to her. He wouldn't listen to Elijah. He wouldn't listen to God. We can decide to be right with God, and that's the most important thing in the world. It's more important than pride, than lusts, than wants, than earthly happiness. That's the hard one. That was another lesson I did. Does God want me to be happy? Well, it depends. Depends on your definition of happy. If happy is just giving me what I want so that I feel fulfilled in this life, nope. Now, Ecclesiastes says that a man should be able to enjoy the work of his life, right? Except if you just use that portion of the quote, you're doing it wrong, because the rest of that sentence is that God has given him. I'm supposed to work and do things correctly, honestly, in a godly manner, and what God rewards me with, I should be able to be happy and enjoy. That's a whole separate thing from setting my sights on being a billionaire and doing whatever backstabbing and anything else I can do to get it. And God gives us hints about this kind of thing. You ever try and do something and it just seems like everything goes wrong? You're like, man, I wonder if this is even worth it. And you sit down and you think about it and you're like, this is not going to bring me any closer to God. It's really just some worldly thing that I'm spending time on. And if it goes through, I might actually wind up spending more time on it than I need to and less time on God. Maybe there's a point to why every time I try and do this, it fails. But the biggest thing, we got to be able to say, you know what, I'm wrong, right? So what choice are we going to make? Right? Which one am I going to be? Am I going to be the dog? Come on, we're gonna go for a walk. No, I don't want to. Just drag me. Seems kind of funny, right? And the thing is, we talk about this like it's just like I tell the kids. It's just like God tells the Israelites every time. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. It is 100% going to get done, one way or the other, but it will either be easy or hard, and it was 100% up to you, right? If you're willing to put in the effort and do it the right way and the easy way, great. And, much like at work, if you're not willing to do it the right way, it's too bad. You're going to wind up having to redo it the right way anyways. And it's going to be a lot tougher on you when you do. That's the choice we got to make. Am I going to be stubborn and I'm not going to cooperate, or am I going to come and, as would say the song that Joel brought up in his lesson, meet in the middle, compromise, being able to see where I'm being too stubborn and recognize that and come to God. Which one am I? Which one should I be? And that's the real question we've got to look at. That's the real thing that we've got to answer, and that is what we've got to try our best not to fall in that trap. We've got to listen, and we've got to put the effort into showing that, the things that were done for us and told to us are bringing forth fruit, because that's what the Lord wants. If you're here tonight and you need to respond to the invitation, we have time to do so now. We set aside that time. What's the first thing that God has been telling us again and again and again and again? We have to leave our sin behind, and we have to be baptized to be forgiven. We have to come to Christ. We can't sit back and just say we're good and everything be all right. It doesn't work that way. God set the conditions. We have to come and we have to fulfill them. If we've been baptized, but maybe we don't have everything right in our lives, that's happened too. That happens. Is it a good thing? No. But it's something that can be corrected. All we got to do is be able to own up to it. Confess your faults to one another. Make intercession for one another. That's what we're supposed to do for each other, and we will gladly do it. The only thing is, we can only do our part of it. If there's a part of it that you need to fulfill, please don't hesitate. Come while we stand and sing.
Oh, do